This is the completion of part one, the significance of the exile. Sin and exile. The meaning and purpose of the exile is doing things gratuitously. It is for this that man is born here. It is for this that man in this world splits himself up into an infinite multiplicity, ever repeating himself. That is also the reason why the temple is destroyed. That is why man eats from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad and is driven from paradise. All this because God has decided to make creation with the leading motive of the great experience of the redemption, of the return of all that was sent very far away at creation. Is sin then the reverse, the ambush of God's issue at creation? Is there sin on purpose, that exile may come about, that there may be expulsion from paradise? For the destruction of the temple is preceded by a period of descent, man's turning away from God more and more, ever more intent on his pursuit of the glamorous objects of time. He knows a plurality of gods. He has altogether lost the idea of the unity of all things, of the sacredness of wholeness. Is this the expression on earth of what is enacted in heaven? There at the juncture, the neshama presents herself to enter into form. The body of the child in the mother by that time has attained perfection in its development. Parturition must take place now. When in the mind of God, creation is on the point of becoming a reality, the initial moment of the exile is also at hand. So exile is not a thing which can be evaded. It pertains to the plan of creation. It is even the most important point at issue thereof. The Torah, therefore, records the exile at the end of time. The exile, which commences with the destruction of the temple, both at the end of the book Leviticus and at the end of the book Deuteronomy, this apostasy resulting in the exile is expressed in the word. This disclosure in ancient lore intimates this basic idea, when with the sin offering on the occasion of the new moon, there is the expression, a sin offering unto the Lord. Ancient lore points out that it is to be taken literally. God himself says that the sin offering, brought in connection with the changes in form, must be brought unto him, unto God himself, because he has created this world of form, this world of the exile, in his plan of creation. Pointing in the same direction, there is a statement that God's words spoken to creation, Pru Yorawu, be ye fruitful and multiply, implies the act of man, which is in contradistinction with the prohibition of eating of the tree of the knowledge. God himself endues man with the power which must lead to formation, hence to the exile. For indeed, the exile is one of the main principles of creation. We are faced here with the duality, obviously a contradiction, a contradistinction, which viewed from the earth is to remain a duality evermore. It is an aspect of the contradistinction known as free will and predestination. Yet the neshama has a solution for it. She acts because there is this duality, and it is only because of that she can so act. She acts gratuitously. She knows the way pointed out to man at the beginning of the exile, at the beginning of condensation into form. The way which in the words of the Torah is also expressed at the revelation of the word on Mount Sinai. In its structure, Sinai is related to moon, hence the form, is taken under the sign Naseh v'nishma, we shall do and learn. Such is the principle, the focus round which everything revolves now that the word has come into this world and the exile begins. We shall do. Not because we understand its profoundest significance, not because we get our wages or a reward for it, not because we shall get healthy and rich and powerful on account of it, but simply we shall do, even if gratuitously. But indeed, we do want to act gratuitously. We know, however, that by and by, in course of time, in due time, we shall also learn, understand. But that is not what we are doing it for. We are willing daily to sacrifice esteem, comfort for the sake of doing even more than is asked for, then often asking for in enigmatic terms. Thus, Abraham went the way of Akedah, the way of sacrificing his only begotten son, because it was demanded, even though it clashed with all other things God had told him. Thus, approximately is the neshama's reasoning, and she experiences the greatest happiness on account of it. For it is at such times that she feels at home, that she feels in harmony with the way of God, doing and good and bad. This doing implies a scale of good and bad, of what should be done and what should not be done. It is ever discriminating, ever inquiring after the way. Even though the world around us goes the way of riotous development, even though all standards are converted into things useful and useless to the world, even though we are staggered by the injustice round about us, we follow the straight path, recognize the difference, know what should be done, what should not, provided the neshama lives and makes itself heard. It is this attitude of the neshama which counteracts the flight away from the source of origin, thus permitting of the return. She expresses herself in the words and acts of the prophets who in the days of decline offered the other life. She expresses herself in every man whenever he is displeased with his own life, his own path, when he asks himself in bewilderment how it was he came to certain thoughts, words, deeds. When he is dismayed at it and repents, the event builds up an entirely new man in him. Such is the prophet speaking in man's own world. The prophet speaks and acts gratuitously. It would have been more profitable for the prophet to keep silent. It is, however, impossible for him to be silent. He must speak, since that is what he was brought into the world for. However much he may oppose it, on the other hand, another power he is not even conscious of compels him to speak, to act. Thus, the neshama has to speak, for like the prophet, she comes from another world. The neshama, too, must hand on what she has been told. She does so almost unwittingly to all intents and purposes, for all that. She, too, often states, in the light of subsequent events, that through her agency, something has been said or done which she was not even conscious of, let alone wanted to be done. The difference between good and bad is the nicety of distinction which the neshama imbues with man. Without the neshama, man only knows the nuances of the more or the less useful, the more or the less harmful. The exile at the zenith of evolution. Now, birth takes place when development has attained its furthermost point. From the point of view with the neshama, sin, aversion from God, the denial of God, at that moment is at its zenith. At that juncture, the neshama speaks and the angel makes her enter the body. The neshama has started on her exile, but thanks to her attitude of revolt against the law of nature, thanks to her being ever promoted by reasons other than utility, she leads the body back to another world, back to the source of origin. Thus, it is at every birth, whether it is the birth of a human being, the birth of a phase in human life, the birth of an event or of an idea. Thus, it is in regard to humanity, to the world. A newly born monkey and a newly born man are said to have many things in common. But from the moment of birth, man in his development follows a direction entirely different from the monkey's. In the monkey, bodily development continues smoothly, uninterruptedly. In man, the neshama has some say in the matter from the moment of birth. It is the neshama through whom the monkey, too, can ultimately be liberated by man from ever continuing on and on. Whenever sin is rampant, the neshama joins her, enters the exile, and the neshama knows the way of good and bad. The neshama knows that action, even against the law of nature, is the great thing. That is the only thing which can break through the law of nature, which will pave the way back. The neshama will ever demand to act rightly, do justice, avoid evil. To do all this disassociated from considerations of usefulness or uselessness. The neshama will speak about it, will try to convince. She is a prophet who makes his appearance whenever development becomes predominant, whenever development comes near the point of no return. She does so in adverse and distressing conditions. She cannot act otherwise. She is sent for that purpose, is called upon to do so. Herein too lies the purpose of the Shekinah's entering the exile. But for it, creation would be lost, would be meaningless. Evolution would emancipate and end up in riotous chaos. Sin on earth is this force of development. It is the force of the Nakash, the serpent. It is the power of Amalek, an ancient lore is acquainted with. Sin is inherent in creation. As soon as a thing comes on this earth, it cannot help but take part in this development, in this growth, otherwise it would stop appearing here. There is a story about somebody who had captured Vester Hora, evil, and set about to kill it. At that moment, a voice called out from heaven to let it go again without delay, because there would not be a hen to lay an egg. All propagation would be stopped. For indeed, that is what it is, to be fruitful and multiply, is the basis for development. God provided creation with it, and man as well. It is the elaboration of God's plan on earth, of God's resolve to make a manifestation, a creation moving far away. At the moment of Neshama's entering this creation is that crucial point when development is provided with the power of restraint. This restraint becomes fully effective at the beginning of the exile. That is why the exile is the zenith of this drama of creation and return home. The specific story of the exile. In the story of the Bible, the ground plan of creation and return, framed in a wondrous harmony, expresses itself in never-ending repetition from the first letter to the last. There are the words which apply especially in heaven and are likewise understood in the world of the neshama. So the exile is repeatedly found in the pattern of that story. As ancient lore has it, from the exile of the Shekinah and via the exile from paradise, there have been exiles time and again, and they are ever succeeded by redemptions. The pattern is impressed on every part, for indeed it is God's seal. It is the pattern of creation. After the destruction of the temple, however, there is an exile which in the Bible is abolished merely by a promise for the future. The exile is our world of today. It is this life. It is the present. It is this exile, starting at the destruction of the temple, which the story of Esther deals with. So the story deals with the world in which the temple has already been destroyed, where history is only present in the neshama who has learned about it from God's angel. Yet the story of the exile forms part and parcel of the whole complex of the Bible. So it is a story derived from that other sphere. Ancient lore dwells emphatically on the phenomenon, a story of exile, of affliction, of the times after the destruction, yet pertaining to the totality of the Bible, which by way of the prophets speaks about the exile and the redemption thereof, but which, for instance, regards the building of a second temple as a mere phase, an aspect of the great exile. The Four Exiles. Ancient lore knows of 4 exiles after the destruction of the temple. This quadruplicity in itself proves that with these exiles is meant the world as such with its 4 elements, its 4 fundamental principles. The 4 exiles are those of Babel, of Persia and Media, of Jawan, and of Edom. The first of these 4 exiles starts at the destruction of the temple. The second recognizes the building of a reflection of the temple. The third, which does not occur in the complex of the Bible, is characterized by the story of the desecration of this temple of exile and its reconstruction. The fourth expresses itself in the destruction of this very temple of exile, and like the fourth world in the great totality of the 4 worlds, it is our reality. Hence, a reality of a temple of exile burnt to ashes also. Here it is that the story of Esther forms part of the Bible. The story of Esther is enacted in the second of the 4 exiles. It characterizes the exile as it presents itself after the destruction of the temple, and most peculiar as viewed from the standpoint of the exile itself, as viewed by the means of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Ghost, with literally the tethering of man by the agency of the neshama. This is the very reason why this story is not merely an interesting story of a later date, but one forming part of the complex of the Bible. It forms part of the great harmony of the Word which has come down to this world as a miracle. In the book Leviticus and the book Deuteronomy, the Torah already knows the pattern of this story of exile. In those books, though the world preceding the destruction of the temple is still prevalent, the pre-mondial world prevails there. In the story of Esther, to the contrary, the word of this world is the subject under consideration. The word after the destruction of the temple, after birth in this world, is the word spoken from exile. It is evident as specially confirmed in ancient lore also, that the word in the exile may likewise be inspired by the Ruach HaKodesh, that there is a connection between this postnatal world and the antenatal world. Although, of course, other post-destruction pieces have been included in the body of the Bible, because they prove to form part and parcel of it. It is this very story of Esther that gives expression to that connection. This is why in Jewish tradition, similar to reading the Torah scroll, reading the scroll of Esther is looked upon as an essential element of life. The scroll of Esther tells about the miracle in the exile, just as the Torah scroll tells of the miracle of creation, the miracle which is enacted before the birth of man and of this world. There is a connection there. There is coherence between the destruction of temple, preceding birth in this form, and life after it, i.e., life of the present of this world. Exile acquires an added significance, a specific significance on account of this connection. Acting gratuitously acquires an exile story of its own, acting against natural law, acting detached from existing standards. The neshama conduct in exile finds the expression in the story which pertains to the great complex of the Bible, though it crops up after the destruction of the temple, after going into exile. In the content of the word which makes its way into this world through the Ruach HaKodesh, it possesses the profoundest secrets, the premondial motives of creation. Because of it, it is a sacred book, a story of the order of another world, a world which is with God. Esther is the story of the exile. Much has been said here about the exile, about history, about premondial history, because the story which will be dealt with presently is a story of exile, because it actually is a story of exile. Hence, a story of most specific character, full of mystery, which can lead us to the very base of this world's secret. In order to be able to understand this story to some extent, we must know what exile actually is and what the word of the Bible is. We have to know the difference between history in the sense of observing perceptible development and history in the sense in which the Bible gives it. We have to ponder first on this acting gratuitously on duality, also expressing itself in the contrast. Plan of creation and human free will, and how in that very duality action acquires that specific character. Exile is a stupendous thing, a specific election. Exile is this life, a life in the image and after the likeness of God. The story of Esther will have a great deal to say on the matter, much that has not yet been said in this way. We shall learn to understand the concept of exile properly, and especially to appreciate that we ourselves have been granted to be in exile. We shall also learn to recognize the signs of redemption as they make their appearance in this exile.